When you gaze into the abyss of another's pain for too long, the abyss begins to whisper in your own language. The empath thinks he is saving someone drowning in darkness, but he rarely notices that the water has already reached his own lips. It is not compassion that chains him to the abuser. It is a secret vow forged in the unconscious, a vow to redeem the same darkness he refuses to confront within himself. Every curse begins as a blessing unintegrated. The empath's gift is sensitivity, the antenna of the soul tuned to the frequency of suffering, but without consciousness, sensitivity mutates into servitude. The empath kneels before the wounded tyrant, the charming narcissist, the manipulative parent, the violent lover, believing that by enduring pain, he transmutes it. In truth, he feeds it. He becomes the priest of another's shadow. I have seen this pattern in the corridors of asylums and in the whispers of dreams. The light that refuses to face its own night will always be seduced by darkness, wearing the mask of need. The empath is drawn to the narcissist not by choice, but by the magnetic pull of archetypal symmetry. The one who cannot feel feeds on the one who feels too much. Together, they form the perfect circle of unconscious worship, the predator and the healer, the void and the flood. Let me tell you of a man named Elias, a case that haunted my study for years. Elias was gentle, almost translucent. In manner, he volunteered at prisons, believing he could reform the violent through love. One inmate, in particular, a murderer named Rolf, fascinated him. Rolf spoke softly, with eyes that shimmered like oil over still water. He told Elias that all he ever wanted was to be understood. Elias listened, wept, and wrote in his journal, "If I can reach him, maybe no soul is beyond redemption." Weeks later, Elias was found dead, strangled by the same man he tried to redeem. When I examined Rolf's dreams, he described a recurring image, a black shadow behind a door, whispering his name, promising freedom if he killed the one who loved him most. Rolf said the whisper sounded gentle, almost maternal. In his unconscious, compassion and death had fused. He projected his repressed guilt, his shadow, onto the one who tried to love him. And Elias, in his own unconscious hubris, projected divine power onto himself, the archetype of the Redeemer. Thus, the empath and the killer became mirror and reflection, both possessed by the same archetype wearing two faces. This is the curse of the empath. He sees the devil in others, but names it wounded child. He feels evil, but calls it pain misunderstood. He is incapable of naming darkness as darkness, for to do so would awaken his own inner demon, the rage, the pride, the hidden desire to control through love, compassion. When divorced from discernment, becomes collusion. You must understand, the shadow is not merely the evil you hide, it is the energy you refuse to own. When the empath refuses his aggression, it incarnates in others. When he represses his need for power, he becomes enthralled by those who display it shamelessly. The unconscious compensates through projection. Whatever you will not face in yourself, you will worship or despise in another. Thus, the empath's obsession with saving the narcissist is a secret desire to save himself from the guilt of being powerful, from the fear of being selfish. The seminar hall grows silent as I say this, because many of you sense the same pattern in your own lives. Perhaps you loved someone who broke you, yet you defended them with sacred fervor. Perhaps you called abuse forgiveness, or manipulation misunderstood trauma. Beneath that lies the ancient archetype of the martyr, the one who believes that suffering purifies. But the soul does not evolve by pain alone. It evolves by awareness. Pain without consciousness is merely repetition. You see, in the collective psyche, empathy and evil are twins separated at birth. One feels everything, the other feels nothing. Both are extremes that deny wholeness. Civilization celebrates the empath because he appears saintly, but nature does not care for saints. She cares for balance. The forest does not pity the dying tree. It transforms it into soil. Likewise, the healthy soul allows what must die to die. The empath cannot. He resurrects the dead endlessly, even when they poison the ground. Let us descend deeper into the symbolic architecture of this curse. Imagine a dream. You are standing in a room full of mirrors. Each mirror shows a face you once loved, each crying for help. You move to comfort them, but as you touch the glass, their hands reach out and grip your throat. You cannot scream, for your mouth has become theirs. That dream, dear listener, is the unconscious landscape of the empath, the prison of mirrors. He is surrounded not by people, but by projections. Every abuser he defends is another reflection, demanding redemption. In one of my patients' dreams, a woman named Clara saw herself cradling a wounded wolf. She nursed it with her blood until it healed, only for the beast to devour her hands. When I asked her how she felt in the dream, she said, "Peaceful, I deserved it." That single sentence revealed centuries of collective conditioning, the archetypal feminine wound that equates love with sacrifice and forgiveness with self-annihilation. The wolf was her shadow. She could not tame it because she loved its hunger more than her safety. You see, the empath often mistakes masochism for morality. He calls his self-betrayal loyalty, his silence grace, his depletion faith. The abuser senses this flaw instinctively. He becomes the vessel through which the empath's unclaimed darkness gains expression, and so begins the invisible ritual. The empath kneels, the narcissist crowns himself God, and both feed the same unconscious altar. One offers control, the other offers devotion. Together they complete the circuit of possession. This is not exaggeration, it is metaphysics. Evil does not always appear with horns. It appears as need. It asks for understanding, for one more chance, for unconditional love, and the empath, addicted to being needed, cannot refuse But every yes spoken against intuition strengthens the spell. The psyche, like nature, demands equilibrium. What is denied inwardly manifests outwardly as fate. And so the empath attracts abusers as moths attract flame, not because he is weak, but because the unconscious seeks completion. In Rolf's final dream before his execution, he saw Elias standing at the riverbank. Smiling, Rolf tried to cross, but the water turned black and thick as tar. A voice from beneath whispered, "He is free because he died loving you." Rolf screamed, "Then I must kill love to be free." That, my friends, is the psychodynamics of possession. The murderer believes that destroying love will liberate him from guilt, while the empath believes that embracing guilt will redeem love. Both are trapped in the same illusion that salvation lies through the other. So, what is the way out? Consciousness? The empath must turn his gaze inward, to the part of him that enjoys rescuing, the part that feels superior through suffering. He must meet his own shadow, the savior complex disguised as humility. He must learn to love without losing himself, to say no without hatred. Only then does empathy become wisdom. Do not think this work is gentle. To integrate the shadow is to walk through your own private underworld. You will find skeletons of kindness that were never returned, and monsters made from guilt that was never yours. You will tremble before the mirror and see not an angel but a wounded God learning boundaries. And when you finally speak the forbidden words, "I am not responsible for saving them," the curse begins to break. The empath's path, therefore, is not to stop feeling, but to feel consciously. The heart must become a discerning organ, not merely a sponge, for love without insight becomes complicity, and forgiveness without truth becomes self-betrayal. To protect those who harm you is not compassion. It is unconscious loyalty to your own shadow. The lights dim in this imaginary hall. I pause and look into the faces before me, faces illuminated by the trembling realization that empathy, too, can be a mask. Some weep, some smile, with bitter recognition, and I whisper the words that end the first movement of this lecture: the light that fears its own darkness will forever serve it. And when the lights rise again, I speak of archetypes, those timeless blueprints of the soul that live beneath our consciousness. They are the invisible hands shaping human history. Crime, love, and faith alike, and among them, the most perilous for the empath is the Redeemer, tyrant duality, two faces of one divine madness. The empath is drawn to the narcissist because he sees within their cruelty the distorted reflection of a God who once promised to save the world through suffering. Archetypes are not metaphors, they are psychic realities. They are living forces, vast as gods and ancient as instinct. When they seize a human mind, the person becomes their instrument. The Redeemer archetype whispers to the empath, "Your pain will purify the world." The tyrant whispers to the narcissist, Your will is the world. Together, they enact the same myth, salvation through domination, played endlessly across time, from emperors to lovers, from saints to murderers. Let me tell you of a case from Zurich, one that revealed this archetype in its most dreadful form. A man named Dieter, a devout theology student, began to preach in the local streets that he was chosen to save the fallen women of the city. He offered shelter, food, and scripture. His voice was soothing, his gaze magnetic, but when one woman tried to leave, he beat her, saying she was possessed by resistance. When the police found his cellar, they discovered drawings of angels with broken wings nailed to the wall, their eyes covered with black paint. Dieter confessed calmly, they wanted to be free from sin. I helped them, and too, in his dreams, he was always climbing a staircase of light, reaching for a blinding sun, but halfway up, the sun turned into an open eye, and it watched him with disgust. That is the moment the Redeemer became the tyrant, when the divine mission turns into control, when love turns into law, when the empath becomes God to another's shadow, then possession begins. Dieter was not a monster. He was possessed by an archetype. And the empath who fell under his influence, a woman named Clara, defended him until her death. He only wanted to save us, she said, even as her body carried the marks of his salvation. What could bind a woman so deeply to her abuser? The answer lies not in her weakness, but in her unconscious loyalty to the same archetype. She, too, was the Redeemer. She believed her suffering sanctified his mission. Thus, the archetype completed its circle, both savior and victim, enslaved by the same God within. This is why empathy, without self-awareness, becomes a sacred trap. The empath does not merely pity the abuser. He worships the divine image that the abuser unconsciously represents. He sees in them not a person, but an unfinished God. The abuser senses this and mirrors it back. You are my angel, he says, and the empath believes it, for he hears the echo of his own hidden pride. The Redeemer and the tyrant feed each other's illusions until both drown in the same ocean of unconscious power. We call this love, but it is a psychic ritual. Love rooted in archetypal possession does not unite. It devours. It demands sacrifice, silence, and blood. And still, the empath kneels, believing he is worshipping the divine when, in truth, he is bowing to his own shadow dressed in holiness. In the collective psyche, this dance is ancient. It appears in myths of saviors who die for sinners, kings who claim divine right, prophets who destroy cities for purity. These are not myths about gods. They are reflections of the same archetypal tension inside every soul, the longing to heal versus the hunger to rule. And when unbalanced, these two merge, compassion becomes control, and love becomes tyranny. Listen closely. The empath's greatest illusion is that his compassion is pure, but no compassion is pure while it hides a secret desire for significance. The unconscious says, if I heal you, I am worthy. If I save you, I exist. And thus, the empath's love is always partly self-redemption. This unspoken transaction fuels the abuser's power. The narcissist senses the need behind the empathy, the craving to be meaningful, and uses it like a lever. Without me, he implies, you would have no one to save. The moment the empath accepts this, the chain is forged. The mind of the empath, under the Redeemer archetype, dreams in symbols of crucifixion and resurrection, not of others, but of himself. In dreams, he is often seen carrying the wounded, bandaging serpents, or bleeding from invisible wounds. He interprets these dreams as divine purpose, yet the deeper message is inversion. The one he carries is himself. The serpent is his own repressed will. The blood is his life force, drained by identification with suffering. He mistakes masochism for meaning. I once counseled a woman, I shall call her Miriam, who dreamt every night of a cathedral on fire. Inside, she heard voices crying for help, and she would rush in to rescue them, but each time she emerged, her hands were covered in ash, her mouth full of soot. They are all dying, she said. I must save them. When I asked what happened if she stopped, she began to tremble. Then no one would know I cared. That sentence, uttered through tears, is the secret creed of the empath under possession. I suffer, therefore I matter. Miriam was drawn to abusive relationships because her suffering became proof of virtue. She could not imagine love without pain, for she had fused empathy with endurance. The cathedral in her dream was her own psyche burning under the fire of the Redeemer archetype, consuming her from within. You see, archetypes are not evil. They are vast patterns of life, but when they seize us, unconsciously, we mistake their energy for identity. The empath who becomes the Redeemer archetype forgets he is human. He becomes an instrument of divine pity, incapable of anger, incapable of limits, and the narcissist, possessed by the tyrant archetype, becomes an instrument of divine power, incapable of humility, incapable of guilt. Together, they perform an ancient psychic drama that sustains itself through polarity. To break the curse, the empath must descend from the altar. He must dare to be ordinary, to accept that not every wound needs his healing. He must allow the other to suffer the consequences of their own choices without interference. Only then does empathy return to its sacred balance, not as sacrifice, but as witness. You may feel resistance to these words, as if something within you protests, but love must endure all things. Yet endurance is not love. It is fear of abandonment wrapped in virtue. The true empath, the conscious one, does not endure evil. He exposes it to light. He does not protect abusers. He confronts them not with hatred, but with clarity. For to love someone truly is to see them as they are, not as your soul needs them to be. The Redeemer within you must die, before the human within you can live, that death feels like blasphemy, for you have spent years believing that your worth lies in your ability to save. But consciousness demands sacrifice, not of the body, but of illusion. The archetype must return to the collective, and the individual must be free. Only then can empathy become an act of strength rather than a wound. As I close the second part of this sermon, I look again into the eyes of those gathered. Perhaps they see in Dieter's madness or Miriam's dream a reflection of their own secret pattern, and I remind them as gently as I can, beware the part of you that calls itself the healer, for it may be the very part that refuses to heal. And when I speak now of dreams, the room grows still, for dreams are the theater of the unconscious, where the forbidden truths of the psyche perform in shadow and light. Every empath haunted by the urge to save another has dreamt the same dream in different forms, a maze that leads nowhere, a serpent that circles endlessly, a wounded child that cannot be reached. These are not fantasies, they are messages from the depths, the soul's confession, spoken in symbols. In the realm of dreams, the empath's curse is not metaphorical. It becomes visible. You may see it as a labyrinth made of mirrors, where every corridor leads you back to the face of the one who hurt you. Or you may dream of water murky, bottomless, and each time you dive to rescue a drowning figure, you awaken gasping, realizing it was your own reflection sinking deeper. The dream repeats because the psyche repeats what consciousness refuses to understand. There was once a young man named Samuel, an artist imprisoned for setting fire to his own home with his wife inside. When I met him, he was frail, speaking softly, as if every word were a confession. He told me, I never meant to hurt her. I only wanted to burn the dream. When I asked what dream, he said it had followed him since childhood, a serpent devouring its own tail inside a maze of fire. In that dream, the serpent whispered, "Save me before I disappear." No. Through months of analysis, I learned that his wife had been a narcissist, charming, cruel, and endlessly demanding. Samuel lived to please her, painting portraits of her face in every color until he no longer remembered his own. When she mocked him for being weak, the dream returned, stronger, louder. Save me. It said, he believed the serpent was her. In truth, it was the part of him consumed by her, the masculine energy, suppressed by endless appeasement. The night of the fire, he said he felt guided by something ancient, like a god asking for sacrifice. That God was the shadow, demanding liberation through destruction. The labyrinth, the serpent, the fire, these are archetypal symbols of transformation. Yet when they appear in the dreams of the empath, they signify something tragic, transformation denied. Samuel's act was the unconscious revolt of a soul too long enslaved by the need to please. His violence was not born of hatred, but of psychic imbalance, the fire of repressed will bursting through the walls of repression. He burned not to kill, but to wake up. The tragedy was that he awoke too late. This is what happens when the empath refuses to confront his darkness in dreams. The dream manifests in life. Every unintegrated image eventually demands incarnation. The psyche does not care for morality. It seeks wholeness. When a dream is ignored, it becomes fate. And so Samuel's serpent denied its voice, spoke through fire. When I tell this story, I am not excusing crime. I am revealing its psychic architecture. Behind many acts of violence hides a dream, misunderstood, a symbolic message turned literal by an unawakened mind. The empath's curse, in its purest form, is this: to interpret every shadow as someone else's pain rather than his own. The dream tries to correct this by forcing him to witness his own capacity for darkness. One night, as the seminar continues, I invite the audience to imagine this. You dream of a room with two doors. Behind one, someone you love cries for help. Behind the other, a serpent hisses your name. You open the first door, always the first, and rush toward the cry, but the serpent's voice follows, echoing from within your chest. You can't save them until you face me. That serpent is the soul's truth, the instinct. The anger, the raw, will bury it under empathy. Ignore it, and you will keep dreaming of saving others while losing yourself. In many of my patients' dreams, this serpent is not evil, but misunderstood. It is the symbol of psychic energy, coiled and unused libido in its primordial form. But religion, morality, and collective conditioning have taught empaths to fear this energy. They call it rage, selfishness, sin. So they repress it, only for it to reappear in relationships as attraction to the powerful, the cruel, the controlling those who embody what they themselves have exiled. The serpent they dream of becomes the narcissist they defend. Let me tell you of another dream, this time from a woman named Helena, who had endured years of abuse from her partner, yet refused to leave him. Her recurring dream was of a glass maze floating above an abyss. Inside the maze, she followed a child holding a lantern, but each time she reached him, the lantern shattered, and the child's face became her abuser's. When I asked her how the dream ended, she said, "I always jump into the abyss to save him." This dream revealed the ultimate delusion of the empathic psyche, salvation through descent. Helena's unconscious told her the truth, that she confuses falling for saving, that her identity depends on chasing unreachable innocence. The child was not her partner. It was her own abandoned self trapped in a maze of illusions, waiting for her to turn back, not jump. The labyrinth is the soul's way of showing that the path to wholeness is not forward but inward. The empath walks endlessly in circles because he mistakes movement for progress. He repeats relationships, redemptions, rescues, until he realizes the exit lies through the serpent, not around it. Every abuser he protects is another turn in the labyrinth, another chance to say, "I have seen this before." Oh, In these dreams, snakes and mazes are not random. The serpent is the ancient symbol of transformation of life, eating itself to renew. The maze is the mind's structure, complex, looping, built by thoughts of duty and guilt. Together, they reveal the paradox of the empath, a soul that must destroy its own illusion of goodness to find genuine love. Dreams of crime, too, often carry this motif. A murderer dreams of washing blood from his hands, but finds the water turning red again and again. A thief dreams of stealing a mirror that reflects nothing. These are symbols of psychic cleansing gone wrong, of individuals attempting unconsciously to purify themselves through repetition of guilt. The empath commits a quieter version of the same act, stealing guilt from others, washing away sins that were never his, and calling it love. The dream does not lie. It is ruthless in its precision. It reveals to each soul the archetypal drama it refuses to see in waking life. For the empath, the recurring dream of rescue is not prophecy, it is pathology. It shows that compassion has become compulsion when he learns to interpret the dream. The spell weakens when he dares to confront the serpent instead of saving it. Transformation begins. Once, a woman approached me after a lecture and said, "I used to dream of being chased by a man with no face. I'd wake up screaming. One night, I turned around and asked, 'Who are you?' He answered, 'You. I haven't had that dream since.'" That is what individuation looks like in symbolic form, the moment when fear becomes recognition, when the shadow ceases to be the enemy and becomes the guide. Dreams are not mere stories. They are laboratories where the soul experiments with truth. To the empath who protects abusers, the unconscious offers constant rehearsal, nightmares that replay submission, redemption, guilt. Each time, the dream gives a choice to awaken or repeat. Most choose repetition, for awakening demands betrayal of their own myth, but for those few who dare to listen, the dream becomes a map, the serpent becomes teacher, the maze becomes temple, and the fall becomes ascent. As the third part closes, I let the silence stretch. The audience breathes differently, now slower, heavier, as if each person is remembering a dream they once dismissed as madness. And I say, softly, the unconscious does not send nightmares to punish you. It sends them to free you from the dream you live while awake. In Sextao, when I speak now of the persona and the collective unconscious, I speak of the masks that civilizations wear, and of how entire societies can become enablers of evil under the illusion of virtue. The empath's curse does not end with the individual. It expands outward, merging with the psychic currents of the crowd. In such moments, the boundary between victim and accomplice dissolves, and the abuser finds not just protection in one empath, but in millions. The persona, as I have taught, is the mask the individual wears to meet the world, the social face designed to conceal the chaos within. It is necessary, yet dangerous. When we identify with it completely, we forget that it is only a mask. The empath's persona is the good one, kind, forgiving, morally superior. But behind that mask often hides resentment, exhaustion, and unacknowledged rage. The narcissist persona, by contrast, is the powerful one, confident, charming, indestructible. Both are lies created to survive a world terrified of authenticity. The tragedy is that the empath's mask is not only for others, it is also for himself. He looks in the mirror and believes his own disguise. I am kind, he says, even as he bleeds. I am forgiving, he insists, even as he dissolves. But the unconscious knows. It sends cracks through the persona in the form of dreams, accidents, and breakdowns. These moments are not curses, but invitations, the psyche saying, remove the mask before it consumes you. Let me tell you of Adrian, a man whose mask became his prison. He was a financial consultant, adored by his clients. His persona was impeccable, a voice like silk, a smile that radiated sincerity. He hosted charity dinners, funded orphanages, and preached integrity in business, yet beneath that mask lived a different being, one who painted grotesque, twisted faces in secret. When the police uncovered his studio after his arrest for embezzlement, they found hundreds of canvases, each showing a monstrous version of himself devouring money that turned to ashes in his mouth. When I examined Adrian's journals, I saw the handwriting shift between two distinct styles. One wrote in perfect cursive, "They trust me because I care." The other scrawled in manic letters, "I take because I am invisible." His persona and shadow had begun to communicate. The mask, overused, had become autonomous. It lived a life of its own, charming the world while devouring his soul. He told me, the mask smiled even when I wanted to scream. In his dreams, he walked through a gallery where every painting was a face he had worn. As he tried to leave, the faces began to peel from the walls and attach to his own skin. When he awoke, he wrote, "I can no longer tell which one is mine." This is the modern disease, identification with the mask. The empath wears the mask of goodness until he becomes allergic to truth. The narcissist wears the mask of perfection until he becomes terrified of shame. Both serve the same archetype. The idol, it is the god of image, the deity of appearance, the false light that demands worship but offers nothing in return. When societies worship persona, they reward manipulation. They call exploitation leadership, and codependency loyalty. Thus the empath curse becomes institutionalized. The abuser thrives not because he is cunning, but because the collective shadow demands his existence. Every time a crowd cheers for power devoid of empathy, every time a culture glorifies suffering as virtue, the collective persona grows thicker and the shadow grows darker. Consider the riot of 1919, when a peaceful city turned savage overnight. The newspapers called it spontaneous chaos, but I saw something else, a psychic eruption. Thousands of ordinary people, clerks, mothers, students became predators in the streets. They looted, burned, and murdered as if possessed. Later, when questioned, they all said the same words. It wasn't me. And indeed, it wasn't. It was the collective unconscious, the primitive layer of humanity that sleeps beneath the thin ice of civilization. What we call mob behavior is nothing but the collective shadow unleashed. It is the same mechanism that binds the empath to the abuser, the surrender of individuality to an archetype. The mob becomes the body of the hidden god, the idol of power, and every participant feels temporarily cleansed of guilt. That is why atrocities can be committed in daylight by people who love their children at night. They have merged with the archetype. They are no longer themselves, and the empaths of the collective, the journalists, the priests, the citizens who understand both sides, begin to protect the perpetrators in the name of harmony. They call for peace without justice, forgiveness without confession. They defend the system that wounds them because they fear what will happen if they stop. This is compassion, corrupted by cowardice, empathy, serving evil. In the psyche of nations, as in individuals, the shadow must be integrated, not the need. The more we repress our collective aggression, the more violently it erupts through politics, religion, and war. A society that refuses to confront its own capacity for cruelty will always invent enemies to project it onto. Thus, wars become collective exorcisms, rituals through which the unconscious purges itself of denied content. You may think this is distant from the empath's curse, but it is the same pattern, magnified. The empath protects the abuser, the society protects the tyrant. Both fear the same thing, the mirror of their own darkness. I remember once standing before a crowd in Berlin, shortly after the war, when the ruins still smoked and the air smelled of dust and guilt. A woman stood up and cried, "We didn't know. We just wanted to believe." And I told her, gently, yes, that is how the unconscious works. It hides behind belief. And belief is the mask the collective wears to avoid responsibility. When the empath says, "I believe in their goodness," he is not speaking of them. He is defending his own persona. To let go of that belief would mean seeing the darkness in himself, and that is the one truth he cannot bear. The same principle applies to nations, religions, families. They build myths of purity to avoid the labor of self-knowledge. They canonize empathy while crucifying awareness. And so, generation after generation, the same psychic drama unfolds, saviors and tyrants, victims and redeemers, endlessly rotating roles in humanity's unending dream. But there is hope. The persona is not the enemy. It is the beginning. The empath can remove the mask, look into the mirror, and whisper, "I am both the light and the shadow." That single sentence, spoken consciously, breaks the spell of the archetype It does not make him less kind, it makes him real. And reality, though terrifying, is the only form of love that heals. When we integrate the persona, we begin to see through the collective illusion. We recognize that the tyrant outside and the tyrant within are born of the same archetype, the unacknowledged hunger for control. We stop rescuing the world and start understanding it, and in that understanding, compassion becomes strength, not sacrifice. The empath must learn the ultimate paradox. Only when he stops protecting evil does he truly serve good. As the final words echo through the hall, I look into the faces of those listening, silent, trembling, illuminated by the dim golden light. They understand now that the empath's curse was never a punishment, but a calling, a summons to awaken, to see that love without truth becomes illusion, and truth without love becomes cruelty. I end the lecture with a whisper, not a proclamation. To heal the world, you must first betray its illusions. To love humanity, you must first stop protecting its demons. And as the lights fade, I imagine each listener walking out into the night, no longer the savior, no longer the victim, but something rarer, something sacred, a soul that dares to see itself completely.